Well, as I settle in with my family to weather another ice storm down here in the south, the Flesh and Blood meta is settling into a winter of fatigue, if you will, and this one may not be at the hands of a hero like Oldhim, who would embrace the weather I'm about to be under. Instead, this time, we are under the thumb of Pleiades Superstar. This is the preeminent fatigue deck that entered the chat, if you will, over the past weekend there at the Calling Columbus, piloted by a couple of different people, but perhaps popularized most by Card Guy's own Damian Riggins. And this deck has some things to say about how the meta is going to be shaped going forward, particularly after the rotation of none other than one of, I would say, the deck's harder to deal with matchups, maybe not, I don't know, leave a comment down below if you think so, in the form of Florian. But at the same time, Pleiades now doesn't have to deal with that, and the meta is going to now change because this deck exists. So let's talk first about what this list looks like. And if we jump over to this screen, you should see it for yourself, because this is Damian Riggins calling Columbus 5th place. Did I say Columbus earlier? I might have said something else. I'm not sure. I think I said Columbus. Either way, he, I think, went down in the quarterfinals, which is unfortunate because this was a meteoric rise for a deck, and we didn't get to see it play out in its fruition. Nevertheless, Pleiades Superstar, for those that haven't checked out the most recent set, Super Slam, is the revered Guardian hero from that set. She's super cool. Doesn't look like a Guardian at first glance, but let's be honest, her card pool and the cards she's going to be messing around with, they can hit pretty hard. But that's not really the point of the deck. The point of the deck is to completely exhaust you. It really does remind me, though, not necessarily of like CYB cards and decks, you know, like that we're trying to fatigue in 2024. It reminds me of like peak Oldhim meta style play, where they are really trying to fatigue you in some ways by damage, and in other ways just because they have better numbers on defense. And I don't know if I hate that or if I'm kind of like, oh, a little, I don't want to say I'm nostalgic for it, but it definitely feels a little bit like those old Oldhim days. But anyway, I digress. Pleiades Superstar, instant tap, remove a suspense counter from an aura you control. That will be happening from time to time with this deck. You can put a suspense counter on another aura you control. Whenever the crowd cheers you, you create a confidence token, which could end up mattering, but more often than not, the point of this deck, like I said, is to play a couple of life gain cards and a couple of defensive cards like, this is Fate Foreseen, by the way, the really pretty one. Oasis Respite, you've got Double Sync below, you've got Red Staunch responses, and then the sort of the big ticket item, in addition to a couple of other these like tech kind of gadget pieces and Remembrance and things, is this sort of tough smash up package and the clash package that goes along with Miller's Grindstone into a lot of matchups. This card allows you, as a weapon that lives on the board, to play for an immediate fatigue state endgame, because in a lot of respects you either know what's coming up on the top of your deck with Syncs or Fates, or you just straight up control the top of your deck with something like Up on a Pedestal, which means that you're going to win clashes. And do keep in mind that the deck is a Guardian deck, and so your blue base has, a lot of these powerful cards like Disable that has 7 power, Macho Grande with 8 power. These are your blues, right? You have Thunderquake as well, Standing Ovation. Those are both blues that are 8 power attacks. And then you also splash all these tough smash ups, by the way, are 5, 6, and 7 a piece. You've got cards that you want to put on top of your deck and then sometimes bring in if you're going first, like Pulverize, so that you can maybe high roll. Though I don't know, this doesn't have the capacity to pull Pulverize like you used to be able to do, because I don't think that they're running the package that allows you to kind of search that out. Doesn't look like it. But you also have just other very powerful cards in reds, these 3-for-7s essentially that are quite good. You have some amount of disruption. So the deck is trying to play for a fatigue state endgame off of the back of these clashes, and particularly trying to stop tempo plays with Test of Iron Grip, and then winning those guaranteed off of like Up on a Pedestal like activations. It's pretty much just about running you out of threats and grinding your deck to dust off of Miller's Grindstone. And it was quite successful at calling Columbus. It both put Damien at the top in the top 8, and it also put a couple of other players towards the top of the heap as well, just missing out. I think actually Damien played, if I remember correctly, I was looking at this, I think he actually played a mirror match in like the final round of Swiss to go to the top 8, and both players sitting in position to maybe make their way into the top 8. Damien ends up doing so. So the deck has the legs to compete with high-level players at a calling, and then the question, understanding that, becomes what does the meta do to shift to that? Well, if we're thinking about heroes that can take Pleiades to task, we know that there was one hero at the very least that did that in the Swiss rounds, which indeed was Acilio, Constella Intelligence. In fact, I believe that game, I don't remember if that game was streamed. Now that I'm thinking back to it, I can't recall if that game was actually streamed, because keep in mind this, Day 1 saw 2 undefeated Pleiades decks, so there was no loss, nary a loss among the 2 of them. It was only on Day 2 when Majin Bey ended up picking up the win with Acilio against Pleiades. I think it was against Damien himself. And apparently the way that went down was just a super mega ultra pitch stack from Majin Bey, which is about what you would expect from Majin Bey to do, and honestly probably what, if you're a wizard, you would want to be doing into a deck like that. You'd want to pitch stack a really big combo turn so that you can push over the defensive value that this deck is clearly trying to present, because it has the capacity to put some damage on the board with like 6s and 7s and things like that. But you do have a limit to the amount of blocking that you can do on a specific turn. And so you want to try and overload that blocking on enough consistent turns where you can eventually just get the win. Acilio apparently has the capacity to do that. I'm also curious though, and we're going to look at the data here in a moment, because at first glance, I would think that Gravy Bones building a board state would be advantageous against this type of deck. And honestly, if Pleiades is going to be doing well going forward into the last 2 weeks of RTN season, I would think that Gravy Bones would benefit from that and therefore be a pick to that. But we're going to look at the data here in just a moment. I looked at it earlier today and I can't recall the number that I saw, so we'll look at it again together. And then you would also think that like maybe attack reactions or disruption or things like that that affect the hand of the Pleiades and sort of mess up their best laid plans might be good into that. Something like an Arachne Marionette maybe would be good into that, but on first glance that might be your thought. But the more I thought about this, the more I'm thinking that it's quite possible that Marionette actually struggles into this deck simply because they don't have enough explosive potential, and there are enough reactions in the Pleiades deck that they have the capacity to just stymie most of those big type turns. I mean, Marionette does have the capacity to go just like Kiss of Death into Kiss of Death into Kiss of Death, all, like in one sort of flurry of turns. And I've lost high rolls, I've lost to that. Just a high roll just blows you out of the water, right? Has the capacity to do that. But I'm not sure that Pleiades, and specifically this version, has that same susceptibility. I don't know, though, if I can say the same thing for, there's your point, Kasai of the Golden Sand. But really not just Kasai. Kasai is just the one that I pulled up. But like Dorinthia, I'm thinking like Dorinthia that's actively teched for this style of deck, and maybe a Kasai of the Golden Sand. These are 2 decks that I would look at and say, I think those would have the capacity, if the player is quite good, and if they are clearly teched for this type of matchup, to be able to deal with it. Not in a very comfortable way, but to at least be able to deal with it. And we'll look at the numbers right after this. But in my opinion, I'm looking at Kasai of the Golden Sand and I'm saying, okay, you need a couple of ways to get extra gold, and then you just need to parlay that gold into a couple of cell swords on any given turn. And you don't really have to be going crazy with, hitting on these swords. But if you get consistent cell swords, like 3 cell swords tops, and you can, leverage those over the course of 3 turns, and they have to spend their turn removing it, maybe you can make your way in that matchup. That plus a couple of attack reactions. And then for like Dorinthia, pitch stacking seems like a much stronger prospect if it'll actually change over to Dorinthia, or maybe it's just stuck. I don't know. Maybe my card overlay no longer works. But Dorinthia seems like another hero that would be able to pitch stack some sort of like a Steel Blade, like Singing Steel Blade combo where you're keeping certain things in the deck, and you also have like I don't know, Iron Song Determination maybe would be a card that I would play in this. Honestly, I used to play that in Kasai, and that one I always loved against Guardians. But like you'd be able to like throw that together with a Supremacy turn, and you put all of those things still in circulation, and you essentially just try to combo them on a pretty big turn. Maybe Dorinthia also has the capacity to do that. But those are the heroes that I first think that would perhaps be an answer. Let's go ahead and take a look at the early data that we could find on Fablazing. Okay, so hopping over to the Fablazing data website, we have this set up to show us just the results from Calling Columbus. Of course, this is in paper in its classic constructed format. We ran the analysis and pinned Pleiades to the top. Now keep this in mind. This was not a deck that was having like this big surge in the meta popularity. This was a deck brought by a handful of players, only 65 matches collected on the tournament itself, whereas Arachne Marionette had 313 matches played across the weekend. So take this data with whatever amount of salt you would like to. It's not indicative of perhaps everything you would want to know, but a couple of things do stick out. Thing number one, I would actually think that Rhinar makes a ton of sense. I mean, we were talking about it on the previous segment, which heroes might be a good answer to this deck, and Rhinar being able to rip apart the hand and the defenses of Pleiades before they really get to use them. That's a really interesting prospect. And you know, I will say this, KO Armed and Dangerous still around means that you can play Claw Rhinar if you want to, and you know, kind of maybe go take some Pleiades players to task on that. Also, Kasai did have a positive win rate into Pleiades. Pleiades at 1-2 record. Again, 3 total matches played, so you can't read into this data too much. But I do think if you can build, you know, some amount of sellswords on the board, maybe that's your way through this matchup. I would want to know more of the Dorinthia results, and maybe there's a world where you could win as Sir Bolton. Apparently there was a Bolton there, and they won a match against a Pleiades. That's kind of intriguing, because you could just maybe do the Lumina combo. Maybe with that new card we talked about on Wednesday, would be very spicy going forward when the set releases. And also, Syndra won 2 matches against Pleiades. Pleiades won 0. I would think that would actually be favored for Pleiades, but maybe there's just more offensive overlap across a hero that's playing a bunch of big defense reactions. And KO as well. I actually thought this would be a death knell for KO. Interesting. KO at 1-2. It's going to be really intriguing to see how many people pick this deck up for RTNs and run it out there, because I do think KO is a deck that maybe people are going to be a little bit higher on. We'll talk about that here at the end of the video. But first, I also, before we go back to that, I want to point out that over the course of the tournament, Pleiades was 6-3 into Gravy Bones, and that to me is quite shocking. I was actually expecting that to be flipped the other way around. Maybe we just had Gravy Bones that weren't expecting that hard fatigue angle, or it also could be that, you know, Gravy Bones as a deck has slowly but surely transformed because of the bans that have been placed down on it into a deck that is not exactly thinking about fatigue in the same way. Like, I remember when the deck was first, you know, being iterated on after it had come out, there were a lot of pieces in the deck that were all about, you know, anti-fatigue. And then that's what people were trying to do, is just kill allies and fatigue you out. And slowly but surely, those pieces have been dropping out of the deck, except for like pieces like Scuba. Those are now in the deck again. I think those are in the deck in force even. Like 2 to 3 copies of Scuba are making their way comfortably into the deck. They're in my deck. They've been in my deck for a while because I like Scuba and dogs are cool. But that card is in there. That's sort of an anti-fatigue card, if you will. Maybe a couple of others like some whalers might splash in. But if Pleiades is on the menu for the meta, then maybe Gravy Bones shifts to try and answer that. And it might be a good answer because board state could just do it for you. And then also, Pleiades also taking Arachne Marionette down at a 3-2, 60% win rate. But again, that's pretty paltry numbers to really try and figure out what's up. That being said, it could be that Marionette just doesn't have the reach to kind of cross the finish line against a hero like that. And then finally, the question becomes, what do we expect the RTN season over the last 2 weeks to look like? I think that this deck has easy to understand power. I think you look at this deck and you go, I run my opponent out of threats. I can jump in on this. I think it's a new hero. I think that's very enticing. A new hero that's all of a sudden doing quite well. I think it's a hero that can fairly approachably be built, maybe fairly quickly as well. So I really do expect to see this hero jump in popularity. Here I went ahead and bounced this back to this screen just so that I could throw the week 3 results back up and take a look again. I mean, looking at the week 3 results, Florian getting out of here leaves 17-ish open spots for other heroes to claim. There are other heroes available, and across the board, there are other heroes that could do well. Pleiades has the capacity to move up the ranks and pass up some of these heroes that were already doing decently well. And if people are expecting that to take shape, then what heroes come up to rise up and match that, right? Maybe another Rhinar, a couple of Rhinar wins. If KO is pretty decent into this deck, maybe KO really does get close to crossing the finish line. Over the next 2 weeks, you've got some time. I don't know, maybe Verdance, like being able to combo. Maybe that was the answer, that this meta at the Calling Columbus really just pushed the answer out, because being able to combo as Verdance and just set the pots on the board and people playing towards that route just got kind of obliterated in day 1 and was no longer a thing in day 2. Could be that as well. So I don't know. There's a spot for Pleiades to maybe make some really interesting waves and shift the meta. And it'll be really intriguing to see week 4 data as RTNs play out. Hopefully, I'll just say it right now, hopefully it's not too icy. Hopefully it's not too snowy where you are. Hopefully you stay safe and well protected. You've got your bottled water and your firewood ready to go. I am also hopeful that me and my family are going to hunker down and stay comfortable over the next couple of days. But the meta as we know it could be shifting, and things could be getting a lot slower and maybe more lethargic, a little bit colder. Maybe shades of Oldhim could be right around the corner. Let me know what you think about this in a comment below. I am really curious to hear your thoughts on this Fatigue deck, the new Fatigue deck to the block. And of course, if you like talking about Flesh and Blood and other card-related activities, make the number go to the other number. As always, thanks for watching.